I'm Emily DeMaioNewton. I'm a multi-faith engagement intern at the Truitt Center, and thank you all for coming. The boy I had a crush on in 3rd grade thought I liked him because he was strong. Well, the joke was on him because I could climb the fire pole on the playground and he couldn't. I'm not sure what my social label was in 3rd grade, but I'm sure it was much closer to girl who reads a lot than girl who can climb the fire pole on the playground. I wonder how these labels arise and how they correlate with gender, because they certainly do. We often see what we expect to see, and this drastically limits us, though I doubt we can even imagine the extent to which it does. This is the 3rd consecutive year these monks from the Kadampa Center have built a sand mandala in our sacred space. Each year, including this one, the mandala has been for peace and healing. But what's different this year is that instead of focusing on the medicine Buddha, this mandala focuses on green Tara. Green Tara is a being of peace and compassion, and she is known as the liberator because she helps living beings achieve happiness and peace. If you have time to look more closely at the tanka, the cloth on the altar depicting her, you'll see that her foot is touching the ground, so she is ready to spring into action and help at any moment. Green Tara began as a princess named Yeshe-Dawa. Yeshe-Dawa dedicated her life to bringing happiness to all living beings and took it upon herself to help liberate them from suffering. The spiritual advisors around her at the time encouraged her to pray to be reborn as a man so she could achieve enlightenment. But Tara said, "Nowhere can I find what is male, nowhere can I find what is female. These are simply forms, no more separate from one another than a wave is from water. But since most Buddhas have chosen to come as a man, perhaps it would be more helpful if I became enlightened in a woman's body." So she did. Representation is so important. This has been a conversation lately, but again, we don't realize the extent to which we're lacking, or how the smallest amount of representation can make an impact. Imagine women before Green Tara who believed they couldn't become enlightened just because of their physical body. This also extends to race, though I haven't had personal experiences on that front because I see people who physically look like me represented in media, and I recognize how important that is to my sense of belonging. But in terms of gender, I'm not so lucky. In high school, my 2 favorite books featured white male protagonists and were written by white men. The first 2 serious stories I wrote myself centered on white males. When I realized this and reflected on why I, a female person with female experiences, was writing about male experiences, it was because that was the literature I was reading. That was my subconscious impression of what literature was. Incidentally, I changed one of the characters to a woman, which made the story about a lesbian couple, and it was much better like that anyway. Around the time I graduated high school, I began reading a lot of feminist poetry written by women. I also performed in the Vagina Monologues my first year at Elon, and I would go so far as to call both of these things healing experiences, because here, finally, was art that reflected me and reflected parts of my experience as a female person that nobody ever talked about. Of course, tons of feminist art exists, but it's a matter of visibility and accessibility. A white male poetry professor I once had said he doesn't care if he sees himself in poems. I wanted to say, that's because you do, all the time. There is such power in seeing yourself represented in art or in culture. Maggie Royer, one of the aforementioned feminist poets, wrote a poem titled, "Where Are All the Women?" that begins, "Ophelia, one of the only 2 female characters in Shakespeare's Hamlet, climbed a willow tree and drowned when its branches broke, sending her into the brook below." I'm tired of women dying in stories. I'm tired of women not existing in stories or not existing as complex people. The theme of Newman Lumen this year is change and transitions, so let's make a change. How many books by people of color are taught in literature or history classes? How can so-called minority experiences be normalized and added to the mainstream understanding of history, not only taught as people speaking from the sidelines? And I say so-called because they don't need to be minority voices in literature or in history books. The Native Americans weren't minorities when the Europeans first arrived here. Let's change something so that in 5 or 10 years from now, another young woman stands up here and says, I feel like I belong in this world, like my voice is heard and valued, like I can become enlightened.